This is our usual last Friday of the month, but it's Thursday. But we wanted to bring you some history about New Year's traditions. So Jane, bring us up to date.
Well, one of the things we were going to do, sooner or later you're going to hear some music on this program. And if you don't recognize what it is, you're not a bona fide senior American citizen.
Oh,
so we're just
okay.
going to keep that in the background there. What I would like to speak mainly about today, to begin with, is the big one in our country, which of course is famous around the world, and that is, of course, the Times Square and the dropping ball. And it has quite an interesting history.
Oh, does it?
Prior to the year 1904, people used to gather in that area, and there were chimes from the Trinity Church. And along about, I guess, early 1904, Adolph Oakes, who was the owner of the New York Times, was doing nice things on New Year's Eve. He was having fireworks displays and things for the public. So they were getting up a little festive spirit. He somehow met a young immigrant whose name was Jacob Starr. And Jacob Starr was pretty good at, he was a good entrepreneur and figuring things out and making things. And he made a ball. This ball was 5 or 6 feet in diameter, and it weighed 700 pounds.
Wow, what was it made of?
It was made of iron and wood.
For heaven's sake.
And nobody knows exactly where the idea of the ball and the dropping ball came from, except that in 1833 in Greenwich, at the Royal Observatory in England, they had a ball that they dropped every day at, I believe it was 1 p.m. And what this was to signify the time, so that the ships standing off could set their chronometers.
Oh.
And this was, of course, crucially important in those days. They had to know the time within a few seconds or they'd go way off course. Mm-hmm. So they got started doing it there. And that's the only thing I could find as a backdrop for having a falling ball. 1 minute,
That
before
makes
the time.
sense.
It makes sense because it became fairly widespread. Not every port, but it was a common thing. And our Naval Observatory allegedly still drops a ball every day but of course they have thousands of different, literally thousands, I think, different clocks and other timepieces. But at any rate, this young man produced this great ball, and our friend Adolph Oakes was interested in it, and a couple of years later, he purchased that building, that comes to a point there in Times Square. Well, he purchased that, and it became the headquarters for the New York Times. So presumably it was kind of a celebration there, or just trying out this new toy. So what he did then was arrange to have a celebration on New Year's Eve, and at 11:59 they would start dropping this ball down a sort of specially doctored up flagpole. Mm-hmm. And so they did. And this started a great tradition. And I guess probably in the background there was music, and of course there was shouting and people, and the crowds grew greater and greater every year.
And what year was that?
This was 1907, and the new was then passing along to 1908. Mm-hmm. And this first ball was a quite primitive one by our later standards, but they had 100 light bulbs, and they were 25 watt. And
blinded everybody.
Well, just about. The very first of our pictures, in fact, shows probably what it was like. But may we see the first one, please? It's just a black and white shot. And here are some of the workers, and you see inside there, this is at the top of, way up high over Times Square in this building. There's this platform on top. So there they are, working away at it. And this lasted for probably a few years. At the same time, they had a wonderful thing. There were a lot of fancy restaurants in the area. Everybody going out, to celebrate the way they always do. And the waiters were all equipped with top hats in at least a couple of these places. And there was a hotel there with a fancy dining room. And on these hats, in tiny light bulbs, 1908 was spelled out. And at midnight, when the ball reached its platform, and everybody's shouting, Happy New Year, Happy New Year, these flashed on. The waiter did something or other, and electrical capabilities were still pretty good in those days.
Yes.
Actually, so we were 1908, it was flashing all over. So it was very festive. And I have not really found anything about what happened in World War I, so I presume that it just went on, because it did become an annual thing at that point. But in 1920, they had an upgrading of it, and it went down, I think, to 400 pounds at that point. They were, I don't think they had quite started using aluminum yet. Later on, they did, of course. But the festivities went on just about the same. World War II, I mean, they did not do it in 1942 or 43. But people came to the square, and they had some sound trucks, and they had some chimes, you know, like the old days in Trinity Church before they had the ball dropping. So they did that. New York, I guess, was dimmed out at the time, or they were worried about it at any rate. In World War I, they should have been worried about it a little bit, because the Kaiser had a kind of suicide plan, you know, to come over and bomb New York. But be that as it may, the show went off just fine. They had, when they changed to an aluminum ball, they changed the lighting somewhat, and somewhere along the line, Waterford Crystal declared an interest, and it wasn't too long then. Well, actually, it was 1955, I think, were the first one with the little triangles of Waterford Crystal. May we see some more pictures, please? We could see that first one again quickly. And, well, that's the third one. That's the first of the ones that had, that's an interesting close-up of people working on it, and that's what it looked like. And you can see it had grown from the 5 or 6 feet in diameter, and all these little crystals had light bulbs in them, and the lighting power was considerably more. Flip on to the next picture, please, and we'll see. Here's this one now that you can see how it was put together then, and those are lighting units inside. I think one has a bulb sticking out the bottom there. I'm not sure if they were all the same in certain ones. Probably certain ones were accented more than others. But in the background, you see the lighted windows of Times Square in the background. This is way up high. Another picture, please. And we can see, see, it was way up high there. I don't know what Toshiba is doing up there, unless they paid some fantastic amount for the ad. But the ball looks tiny up there.
It does,
but
from that angle.
When you go down this canyon, of course, and there's a street down there, and this is right on the point, naturally enough. But this is where they did their work, and inside there, underneath the platform. On the other side, there's a sort of ladder. So somebody actually went up there and worked on it. Or they do it, I guess, from time to time. Now, the next picture, we're going to see some of the different configurations that they've had and the colorings. They've been very pretty, and you can see there's a stalk here. Now, I'm not sure whether it was before this or after this, but in 1981, New York started that big campaign they had, I Love New York, I Heart New York. And what they did was turn this all red and put some green lighting on the stem. And I haven't found out whether they really tried to shape it like an apple or not.
Oh.
I think they did, because accounts either differ or don't say. But for 7 years, they had it up there as an apple, as a big apple, way up high. People wish you could see it very well, no doubt. But that went on, as I say, to the end of the 80s. And at that point, some new things are coming along in lighting and just in the general way of putting it up. Waterford Crystal had developed more weather-resistant crystals, so they had a great show going there, and they went on with it. Now, in the mid-90s, I think they just had an aluminum, they put like an aluminum skin over it, and they had strobe lights came in. It was computer directed. They didn't have to have people there saying, move it down another second, move it down. No, the computer took care of it all. But then just a few years later came the millennium, and they wanted to do something big for that. So, of course, they revamped it again, and they had Waterford Crystal is always in inclusion here with Philips Lighting, and they're the ones who are responsible. Well, of course, when you're down below, you're not thinking about that. You're looking at up a pretty steep angle, or at the other end of the square, but it's just coming out this wonderful, vivid lighting. They outdid themselves in 1907, or in 2007, because this was the 100th anniversary of the first one. And they had something like, I think it was 32,000 triangle LEDs with the triangle, and they had over 2,000 of the little sort of extra units inside. It was a monster show that they had going there. So this is what you may think of when you see it going now. Of course, some years were very cold, some years weren't. They had people hosting it. It caught on all over the world. Places were looking at it in the television. You know, Australia, for instance, is already tomorrow. So later, their day, they might tune in and see what's going on. But it just really captured the market for fancy New Year's celebrations.
Right. That's right. We can start watching New Year come in around the world right now.
We can.
Right.
Before our show here ends, we're going to go back almost 40 years and see what one of the things was like with this very music I mentioned. That's going to be a test if you recognize who it is.
Okay.
Coming up there. But now, this was not always the season of the year for celebrating New Year's. It was, I guess, in European lands for a long time. But way back in Egyptian days, it was the middle of the summer, because they set the New Year beginning by the rising of a certain star, reappearance of a certain star from behind the sun when we got around the sun. There, the ancient Babylonians they were spring. It was around the equivalent of about March. The Jewish New Year is spring, early spring. It's February and March. And this makes a certain amount of sense, nature, awakening of nature and all that. The Chinese New Year is also in the spring, probably for the same reasons. In the fall, I'm sorry, I misspoke about the Jewish New Year, of course, is in the fall. The Chinese is in the spring, and some of the other Mideastern. But the Jewish New Year is in the fall. And so we had all kinds of different things in different places at different times. Now ours, I guess, got started, of course, probably what we have came from the northern lands, the Norse lands. There isn't that much land in the South Pole, but of course the length of the days varies the way it does up here. But they were petrified in early days that the sun would go away.
Right, because it kept going further and further.
And they began to realize that it would turn around and come back. But they wanted to make sure it would. So all the celebrating and the whooping and hollering were to make the sun come back. And some very interesting, quaint customs developed. I would like to look specifically at one of the northern lands. There are a lot of interesting things going on. Of course, most of them have a church service at midnight, and then they'll whoop it up after that, and there'll be noise and all that. But in Scotland, this is something that you rarely hear about. I was very surprised to see it mentioned in the news on Yahoo, on my front page of Yahoo. But this is something called Hogotai. Hogamai. And it has nothing to do with hogs or pigs or whatever. But see, happy Hogamai. This is a card. I started life as a card. But fireworks, noise, a humongous celebration. In Edinburgh is the main center of doing that. So these pictures, I think, I have a couple of pictures here to show you of these. This is a humorous side to the whole thing. And this one, you can't see the details too well, but these are all hogs and piggies and so on, all dressed up in Scottish attire, kind of the 18th century things. And somebody's reaching down from the balcony and untuning that double bass. You would look kind of in consternation. So they're having a grand time. There's nothing reverent. Now, the Dower Scots religious side was different. That was strictly forbidden. You did not do anything on Christmas. There was no loud anything like that. It was very, very prim and stiff. But this held out that they got from the Norwegians, the Yule, you know. Let's look at another picture here. And this shows one of the outdoor crowds, and you can see there was some kind of, looked like an amusement park thing there, but huge crowds, and there looks like a refreshment stand or something. One year they had 400,000, and they won the Guinness Book of Records. The next shot, I think, is, oh, no, here's another one of the cards. Now this one, it says here, and I practiced up saying this correctly, Lang may ye rake. And you can see there's a little picture of a house with a smoking chimney. And the rake has nothing to do with reek. It means smoke. It means long may your chimney smoke. And this giant is up there, long may your rake. I think it's a delightful thing to say to people. Happy New Year is fine, but that has a lot of pizzazz to it. And I think there's one more shot of in Scotland. No, maybe we went by that one. We probably did. But they don't do that anymore, of course, because of the dangers. And this time, in fact, the news this morning had Berlin is, I guess, was still debating when they asked them. They didn't say about Berlin. London is having its full blast, but Brussels is not, and Paris, I guess, is trying to take a middle course there in that. So, what does that leave us with here in terms of our celebrating? Well, people do all kinds of things. Now this represents last year's, in 2014, and you can see they had a graduated scale where you could follow the numbers, and I think they lit the numbers up. And I looked at it, but I didn't really remember seeing the ball do much. And of course it goes by pretty fast. But very elaborately set up. Now the next picture is supposed to be this year, so it must be somebody's drawing, because this was labeled 2015. At the end, you know, the going on. I have a feeling they might have meant that this was entering 2015. But be that as it may, you can see the character of the things has changed a great deal. The ball is kind of, you can barely see it.
Right. There's so much other going on.
But you do see ads, and this is a far cry from the little square where you saw the point of the building and the people massed below, and church chimes in the background, or this little 5-foot ball with going on. But it's quite an interesting thing, because it took around the whole world, and they watch it, and they've had some celebrations on it, and it's a nice phenomenon. But
I think every community has its own way of celebrating.
Yes.
You know, maybe not as elaborate, but
and individual people will.
Right. I know when I lived in Winchester, the fire sirens always went off at midnight.
Oh, yeah.
And people would shoot off fireworks.
Oh, yeah, they'd save them from the
Right.
From the 4th and shoot them off.
Right.
Yeah, it was pretty nice the way they did it. But we have now, our television, of course, can carry this around the world, and a lot of ours goes on television. You know, you sit home and my mother always, there's another one of those massed crowds of it, yeah. My mother came from, her parents were European. Her mother was Austrian, her father was German, and she said they all had a little supper at midnight, and it had to have fish in it. It might just be a bite of fish or one shrimp or tuna fish salad or something, but there it was. So I think we will now go and get a preview of, maybe I like a preview of what we're going to have tonight. If we can see now our final clip. And this will show. Okay, well.
No. Don't have it? There we go.
There we are, yeah, all right. We see lots of the crowd here, and we're going to be popping forth and back.
Make you dizzy watching it.
sort of thing is fun to see if you can remember what you were doing when it entered 1977. Because we were all at our prime at that point, you know. And there's the band leader. That should awaken some memories. He was the main one for being associated with New Year's Eve.
That was always the thing to do, was to listen to him. And
Yeah. Well, maybe I'd better tell you who it was. If you would hear the music, you would hear
we're not hearing it here in the studio, but it may be going out over the air.
I hope it is, yeah. Well, the person involved, unless you remember who it was Guy Lombardo. And we never liked his music terribly much because we thought it was sort of corny. But somehow he was just 100% associated with New Year's Eve.
Oh, yes.
And on this was especially good broadcast, I think, because it was bouncing between. You'd have you'd be in Times Square, and see all the crowd, and the announcer was talking about the cold weather, and so you got a little idea of what was going on there. And then it would bounce back, and you'd hear the music, and he was playing, "Oh, Happy Days Are Here Again," all the good things you play on New Year's Eve.
Right.
In fact, when I found that thing online there, I went around all day long singing "Happy Days Are Here Again." So it was jolly music, and I'll put you in a good mood for the new year.
Right. You sometimes wonder if Guy Lombardo ever played any place else.
You do. I know he played at the Roosevelt and at I guess one other place in New York, but we once won a dance contest. We were dancing went to the Roosevelt, and we're dancing there on the dance floor, and they began tapping people on the shoulder, and they were doing all kinds of different beats. They were doing everything, Latin and everything, and we could do all that stuff. So, long story short, we won the dance contest. So we were allowed to go up on stage, and we shook Guy Lombardo's hand, and he said thank you, and so it was
How fun.
I think we probably mentioned to him, here's some fireworks showing up here. All over the world, they're doing great things. Probably in the news today, we'll see some of the stuff in Sydney in Australia, because they're always great. They show fireworks over that exotic
Over the opera
house.
Right.
Yeah, and there are some more.
They always do a fantastic show.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Well, that gets us all in the mood, I hope. And later on in the day, we'll have to really. Some people actually go to bed and take a nap so that they
can be up at midnight.
At midnight, yeah, and watch. But I think a lot of us our going to bed time tends to creep up and up and up.
It does. It does.
But they have some quaint customs. I know in places like Iceland, which we talked about not too long ago. They have a great celebration there. And Iceland is mostly Protestant, but there's some Catholic remains from the original Celtic influx. But they have, they make much of a church service, and I think there starts at midnight, the one I read anyway. But then they will just party till morning, go on and on. So,
my son lived in Iceland for a while, and when I visited him, my impression was that they loved to party up there.
Oh yeah, the Scandinavians,
especially in the wintertime.
all that hard liquor that originates up there, and our Yule log and that whole bit comes from it. Although the original Vikings who brought that, were not terribly nice.
Right.
They're not nice at all. But they left, when they settled down, they kept some of those. There was another custom about your first visitor of the new year. You tried to make that significant in some way.
I remember something, yeah. My mother-in-law had the superstition that you didn't take anything out of the house on New Year's Day
Interesting.
because that would be bad luck.
What was her background?
I really don't know. I don't know where she got that from, but you know,
Yeah.
if you start to take the garbage out after dinner, oh no, no,
Oh.
no. Don't take anything out of the house
No.
on New Year's Day.
I've heard something about doing. You should do the things. You should spend your day doing things that you want to do and accomplish.
That you want to do, yeah.
Nobody
We're
make-
into the last minute. We're almost through, so
Oh, dear.
quick.
No, well, I was just going to mention about the whole resolution thing and how it's
Yes.
fallen away. You never hear anybody talking about making New Year resolutions
Well, I think we
anymore, do
break
you?
them so easily.
I suppose. But it's at least people tried and would say,
Maybe our best New Year's resolution ought to be to get along with everybody.
certainly would be a good idea.
It would be.
They were saying this morning something was that they couldn't even, some political thing, they couldn't even agree on whether to have bagels or donuts at their office Christmas party. Imagine. Well,
Anyway, thank you, Jane. I think this has been a lot of fun and interesting.
get in the
So,
spirit. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, Happy New Year.
Happy New
Year
Year.
to you and Happy New Year to
Happy New
everybody.
Year to everyone.
And let's try to make 2016 a good one.